Welcome to Coffee Break with Rachel V. Hill, presented by Superbook Sports. Taking a daily look at the biggest stories in Denver sports and interacting live with you, the Coffee Break fam. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe, and enjoy your coffee break. Here's your host, Rachel V. Hill.
Happy Friday, everyone. I am not Rachel V. Hill. Neither is the great Andrew Mason, but we will do our best to fill in for Rachel. As Jake and I told you yesterday, she is on a well-earned vacation, so we're going to sort of hodgepodge this thing together while Rachel enjoys Hawaii. Mace, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing all right. It's good to be here. It's funny for a week that is kind of the start of the downtime. It's been pretty busy this week, it feels like.
It is funny how, when your team wins the NBA title, and then the NBA draft is 9 days later, and we'll get to that momentarily. When your hockey team is still the Stanley Cup favorites, when your football team hires a very high-profile head coach and still has a high-profile quarterback, when your football team in Boulder hired the most high-profile coach in the country, maybe outside of Nick Saban, and we'll get to Coach Prime in a bit because he's got some medical news, and then your baseball team's a total dumpster fire, there really is never a downtime, is there, Mace?
Yeah, there really isn't. It's funny, kind of closing with the baseball team being a total dumpster fire. I mean, if you're not going to be good, you've got to settle down at the bottom. The worst thing is like in the middle, right? We say that in football. We can also say that in baseball. And I mean, the Rockies, I would say for better long term, because it might make them accept some uncomfortable truths. They're better off long term having a season where they just bottom out. They start today with the worst record in the National League, both in win percentage and in terms of games back. There was a little quirk in the standings that we were talking about in our text chain yesterday, but unequivocally the Rockies are the worst team in the NL, and they're injured. And as we're going to get into later, the injuries go deeper than the Major League roster. But yeah. There's always there's always something. I mean, I was actually I'm going to post this a little bit later, a little something from a Nathaniel Hackett, and he was on Peter Schrager's podcast this week, and it was kind of even him talking about his experience with the Broncos without mentioning the words Denver Broncos in his response.
Yeah, I don't think Nathaniel Hackett remembers his time in Denver real fondly, his all of his 15 games here as head coach of the Broncos. So, yeah, there's always a lot going on. And obviously the big news last night, Mace, was the NBA draft. The Nuggets pick at 29, 32, and 37. 29, they take Gonzaga guard Julian Strawther, Penn State guard Jalen Pickett at 32, and then Hunter Tyson, a forward, at 37 from Clemson. They keep all three picks. Some people thought Calvin Booth may use them as ammo to move up. They don't take any European players. No draft and stashes here. They go Gonzaga, Penn State, Clemson, and they go guard, big man. Although, let's be clear on Strawther, he's listed as a guard on Gonzaga and ESPN's website. I saw some folks wanting to call him a forward, and our buddy Mike Singer from the Denver Post called him a wing. So it kind of goes more and more towards positionless basketball. People will remember him, Mace. He played 2 tourney games at Ball Arena this year and won both. So he's already been in the building. He wore a Nuggets championship hat last night when he got drafted. He tweeted a video of the vintage Denver Nuggets jeans. Like, the Gonzaga kid already leaning into it. We'll talk about all three of them, but let's go bigger picture. What did you think about the picks, keeping all three, and maybe any common themes you sense between the three selections?
I mean, I think Calvin Booth has a little bit of the more darts philosophy than we've seen. If you follow the Broncos, George Payton, their general manager, has talked about that. They say, okay, we got 3 picks, and obviously one's first rounder, the other 2 are second rounders, but they're really in kind of that same range. You're getting sort of, in terms of outlook and potential, the same type of player on balance. So I get what he's doing here. It's kind of you increase the spray. Another Sean, that's a Sean Paytonism, and you see what you get. The funny thing is, Sean Payton as a drafter is one who likes to move up and get a specific player, whereas Calvin Booth went for 3 here. And the other interesting, you mentioned, no, they're not European players. We're not talking about guys coming from the G League Ignite here. These are guys with extensive college experience. Yep. And you're going to get a better read quickly on these guys. We're not talking about, like you said, like a European player. We're not even talking about a guy who kind of played sparingly, like a Peyton Watson when they draft him, when they got him, and he played. He averaged like 3.3 points a game or something like that at UCLA, and he was a bench player. Yep. No, these are guys that they've got some experience to them. They're closer to being fully formed and being who they are. And so you're going to figure out their potential quickly. And I think also when you're trying to sustain a championship run, you're looking for players with a better chance of helping you in some kind of bench role immediately. I mean, Christian Brown, a great example of a guy who, I believe he was 3 years at the University of Kansas, won a national championship. He came in closer to what he was going to be in terms of developing as a fully formed player. And the result was you got somebody who could step in right away and give you positive minutes. And those were very much needed as the season went on. And effectively, he made Bones Highland redundant. So you had one guy you'd picked, and then you found somebody better. And it's all part of how you're constantly building your team. Even though you're a title contender, you're constantly trying to build the team, to find the best players for the best spots. And so honestly, I like this draft and the emphasis on extensive college experience for where the Nuggets stand. If they were coming off a 34-48 season, I don't think you'd see 3 players who played 3+ years of college basketball at a high level like these two. But that being said, you mentioned Julian Strawther at Ball Arena, and if you went to those games or if you watched college basketball, the fact that Strawther is drafted and Drew Timme goes undrafted, it's another example of how college and pro are becoming 2 different games. I mean, college hasn't really gotten to that positionless level the way the NBA has. So even you're drafting experience in a guy like Strawther, but you're still kind of doing a projection here because it's what you have to do based on how the games are kind of are divergent, basically. So, I mean, you saw I kept looking last night on the trending topics, and as the draft went into round 2, kept seeing Drew Timme's name trending. He's a big name, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate. Julian Strawther's game, like you came out on top of the show saying, positionless has a better chance to translate.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I've seen a lot of the Nuggets should give Drew Timme a shot in Summer League on Twitter, and it's like, sure, why not? None of your championship players are going to go play Summer League. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen Drew get picked up anywhere yet. Maybe he has. Those transactions kind of tend to trickle in. But let's
Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh, so he went to a contender. We'll see if he makes the team. But
we'll get a look on him and look at him in Summer League. But it's interesting. You look at Drew Timme going undrafted, and then the 3rd pick is Hunter Tyson, and he's a 6'8" forward out of Clemson. Well, when you watch him play, he can bang around down there, but he also can very nicely fan out to the perimeter and has a real smooth jump shot, and he can. And the other thing that I like about Hunter Tyson as well is he's one of those guys that he can make some impact on the boards, and he can do that because he has a real good sense of how to play angles and how to be in the right spot. I saw some of that watching him at Clemson over the last couple of years. So I'm even though he's the last of these picks, he's kind of on the caboose, and probably there really isn't a clear spot for him to have any kind of impact this year if he flourishes. I think he's actually got some intrigue to him, and I'm interested to watch him in summer league.
Yeah, I am too. I'm interested in him because it's not every day you find a guy who averaged nearly 10 rebounds and shot 40% from three.
Yeah.
And that's what Tyson did in his 5th year at Clemson last year. You mentioned that. Pickett played 3 years at Siena, 2 years at Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
Strawther played 3 years at Gonzaga. It is the Christian Brown model. And I tweeted it last night, Mace. If just one of these guys gives you any sort of significant contribution in 23-24, that is a win. I also said at the end of that tweet, what I want to talk about next, what would be even better is they bring Bruce Brown back and these guys all spend a year learning from the champs. What does this draft, do you think, indicate? Calvin Booth did not speak to the media last night. He certainly would have gotten asked about it. He'll speak on Monday is what we're hearing. What did this draft indicate to you about Bruce Brown with Strawther, who's listed as a guard, Pickett, who's clearly a backup point guard, sort of fits that Bruce Brown role, and then Tyson, who can shoot the three? Are they prepping for life after Bruce Brown, or are these insurance policies? And as Coach Malone would say, Brucey B, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think they're insurance policies just in case something goes sideways. But at least for this year, you start looking over the horizon a year or two from now. And if you get one of these guys to develop, and then you've got Christian Brown earning his way into more time, then I think what it does is it gives you the flexibility to make a move that you may have to make salary cap wise, which is to move on for Brown maybe more than you want to if you're going to preserve what you've got elsewhere in the starting lineup. And the way to sustain this with your top 4 core is that you're going to have a draft and development element to this roster building. And so that's kind of how I see it. I don't see this as pushing Bruce Brown out the door now, although you can kind of cover and put things together if he moves on. But a couple of years from now, if you get Bruce Brown on a medium-term contract, a year or two from now, I think then you are talking about having the flexibility to make a move on Bruce. If you've continued the progress of Christian Brown, plus you've gotten at least one of these guys, preferably Strawther, to come along and develop and have a role.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And JJ Redick talked about it last night on the broadcast. The Nuggets already have 3 max players in Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and Michael Porter Jr. Aaron Gordon's making a ton of money. And if Bruce Brown eventually does get his bag from Denver, you're going to run out of salary cap space. And even if you bleed in the luxury tax, and that's a different combo for a different day, there's a cap in the NBA. There is. This isn't baseball. You can't just pay everyone forever. I think it's smart by Calvin Booth. Mason, it reminds me of an old John Elwayism. We're trying to win from now and now on. And it feels like that's what Calvin did last night a little bit, right?
Yeah. That might have worked if they'd gotten quarterback right in 2016.
Yeah.
We kind of look back on that and we shake our head a little bit, but he had the right philosophy, just the wrong method of trying to make that happen. But the idea was sound. It's what everybody wants to do, right? Yeah. The Chiefs wouldn't use that term, but that's what they're trying to do. And it's funny, to make a cross sport comparison here, what we're talking about with the Nuggets and saying, okay, you can only fit so many contracts because you have the 3 maxes and then you have Aaron Gordon, and there's just not, there may not be room to give Bruce Brown what he wants long term. It's what you're talking about with the Kansas City Chiefs right now, having to periodically say goodbye to players. You just hope you're making the right moves, and then you're able to develop behind them because you're the Chiefs. You want to keep Patrick Mahomes. You want to keep Travis Kelce. But you determined that Tyreek Hill was expendable and that you could replace him and get that production other ways. That gamble paid off, and they end up winning the Super Bowl again last year. So if you do move on from Bruce Brown, if it does not work out in the next couple of weeks and he does take a bigger contract elsewhere, you may be asking guys to grow up sooner. But I think the ideal thing is you get Bruce Brown back And then a year or two from now, you're talking about saying, okay, we can afford to make that move.
All right, last one for you on the Nuggets, and then we're going to get over to the Broncos. You and Cecil have been doing some fun things. Do you think this race, if you will, and we saw it continue yesterday with the addition of Chris Paul to the Golden State Warriors, do you think this race is kind of funny? Because the Nuggets built their team organically. They built the team the right way. And within weeks of them winning the title, almost days at this point still, the Suns chased Bradley Beal. And the Warriors are now chasing Chris Paul. It's kind of funny that they're still trying to do the super team to catch the Nuggets, who are the organic team. It was just another little wrinkle yesterday that was funny when we all saw Chris Paul to the Warriors. We got a little bit of a chuckle.
I did, for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is you go with these clubs, you go with what you know. At one point, the Dubs had, of course, Kevin Durant, and that was their super team. And now you have KD down in Phoenix. And what are they doing? They're trying to put together the super team here. It feels like it feels like it's almost from another time, this philosophy. Because you look back, obviously the Nuggets winning it this year. You go back a couple of years, the Milwaukee Bucks winning it, and they're kind of and they're mostly a homegrown team. Although they did have some strategic moves like a Jrue Holiday they brought in, but you could say the Nuggets the same thing kind of with Aaron Gordon, right? You bring him in, and so it's interesting to kind of look at this. I think it tells you they're scared of the Nuggets.
Yes.
I think you should be flattered by that. I also, from there, looking at it and stepping away from the Denver perspective and looking big picture, I think it's I think it's good money after bad to some degree. I know,
right.
And the thing is, all the respect in the world for Chris Paul, who's about to go down in history, right there with players like Malone and Barkley and Stockton as the best players who didn't have a ring. I get, for him, I get why he wants to go there. Certainly, I'm glad for him that it works out to where he's not playing out his career in an NBA backwater like Washington. But I don't think you're going to plug him in on the Dubs and it's going to work, especially if we're talking about Draymond Green not being a part of that anymore, because they're going to lose that leadership and they're going to lose that glue. And even if they did have Draymond and Chris Paul and Steph Curry, I think you look. I'm like, okay, great. This sounds awesome. If we're in 2016, we're in 2023 now. Okay, right. It's like you look at the Suns and you look at the Warriors, and frankly, if you're the Nuggets, I don't think you need to be scared, because we're talking about something whose prime is several years in the past, right? That's the 2010s. The Nuggets are now. The Nuggets are now, and they're probably the future. Knock on wood here, as they evolve, continue to evolve as a contender. So
they are the 2020s. They are the 2020s. I like that. The one thing I will say on Draymond, they traded Jordan Poole to appease Draymond, and I know he declined, and he's a free agent, but I think that was their Hail Mary of like, okay, Draymond, the guy you got in the fight with, the guy you punched, we got rid of him. It's not a big enough locker room for you both. We want you to come back. So that was their Hail Mary to keep Draymond. We'll see if it works or not.
Yeah, and you get what he means to that team, but again, why are you focusing on trying to get one more out of the past when you should be turning the page a little bit? I mean, to bring it back to the city of Denver, when the Broncos were trying to make another run there with that defense from 2015, and they were kind of trying to hang on. In retrospect, you look back and say they would have been better off turning the page before they did. Like and so the problem is nobody wants to do that because it's scary. There are very few franchises that really want to do it. Even the San Antonio Spurs, long a model of good management, probably hung on to some guys a little bit longer than they should have. And only in the last 3 years, they finally kind of just cut it off and say, let's just be bad and look at the rewards. They get arguably the best prospect in 20 years, although we will see how his body holds up because, and I'm going to date myself here, when I watch Wemby, I have some flashbacks to Ralph Sampson. I'm old enough to remember Ralph Sampson 40 years ago.
Okay.
And he was 7'4". He had a jump shot. He could run the floor. He could handle the ball. But man, I mean, his body couldn't hold up. And we know that, Yao Ming's body couldn't hold up as well. So, I'm a little bit concerned about whether his body type can handle the rigors of the NBA because I've seen how this has worked out before, but we'll see.
Well, you mentioned something about the Broncos, which is a good segue into our next topic on the show, and that is what if the Broncos ... And the reason I wanted to talk about this today, Mace, was because you and Cecil Lamby have been doing a really fun series on Orange and Blue today with some of the biggest what ifs in Broncos history. And I know they've garnered a ton of interest. Seen a lot of people watch them on social media, a lot of reaction because fans love hypotheticals. I love hypotheticals. Sort of could the course of history have been different if things had gone a different way, whether that be a singular play a la Raheem Moore, whether that had been a draft pick a la Paxton Lynch, whatever. How would our lives be different? How would things change? Sort of that butterfly effect. Give us your favorite one you guys have done so far, and maybe any other favorites you have coming up, or some of the greatest what ifs. And if anyone in the comments wants to get into, we'd love to hear some of your greatest what ifs in Broncos history.
Well, one that we did on Thursday was one of my favorites. That is, if the Broncos had won the 2005 AFC Championship. Of course, they played that against Pittsburgh at home. The Steelers had upset the Colts, and at the time, the Colts were the Broncos' nemesis. Like they couldn't beat them. They'd gotten whipped by the Colts the previous 2 years in the postseason. And then all of a sudden you get this reprieve. The Steelers beat the Colts. And I remember texting a buddy of mine saying right after that game saying, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. And Broncos got that. And it felt like the whole city was overconfident that week, Will.
They were going to the Super Bowl. Yep. Yes. I remember that. I was 15 years old at the time, and I remember the vibe of, hey, I was only 7 and 8 when they went to their first two, but they're going to go to one when I'm 15, and in high school, this is going to be cool. You're right. There was a vibe around my high school. We're going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and it didn't work out. And really, that day, Mike Shanahan didn't get fired until after the 2008 season, but you look back on it, and that day was the beginning of the end for Mike Shanahan.
Interesting.
And things that happened all started that day. First of all, if they win that game, that was not an impressive Seahawks team that won the NFC. I think the Broncos win the Super Bowl. And so then you're talking, first of all, about Mike Shanahan having a third world championship. He's in the Hall of Fame, but eventually. But the thing that happens is, even if the Broncos hit a snag in the following 2 years, because you've got that Super Bowl that's right there recently, that gives Mike credibility to ride it out for a while. Cecil and I kind of dove into it, and we said, first of all, I don't think you end up with Jay Cutler as the quarterback. The Broncos trading up for him. Maybe Jake Plummer comes back. I just, I know Jake has said that, maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have. I'm going to live in the universe that says Jake, after winning a Super Bowl, would have come back for another go. That, like, I think his teammates might have said, hey, come on back. And then that means the 2006 season is different. I think they're probably a wild card team that year. But you don't have Jay Cutler. So I think what happens is Jake kind of declines, but it's Mike Shanahan who leads the rebuilding out. And that leads to some interesting discussions. What happens at quarterback? Well, what Cecil and I did, we said as Jake kind of fell, we said the Broncos would take 2 quarterbacks in the 2008 draft. That they took. We had them taking Kevin O'Connell. Now of course, Now he's a coach.
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connell was a 3rd-round pick back in 2008. So we're going to we say, okay, Broncos take Kevin O'Connell, and then they take Josh Johnson later on in the draft.
Oh, we know Josh.
So and Josh is kind of a West Coast offense specialist. So our theory was that you'd have those two guys in. Josh Johnson would kind of be a bridge quarterback trying to figure things out. He would end up beating out O'Connell and would be okay, but not great. But by the time you get to about 2011, 2012, the Broncos start getting frisky. Mike Shanahan, who by this time, by the way, has brought in Kyle as his offensive coordinator like he did in Washington. So here's another aspect of it. That Washington staff that had Sean McVay, that had Matt LaFleur, is in Denver.
Okay.
And
real quick, if folks are tuning in,
yep.
This is if the Broncos won the 2005 AFC Championship game. This is all the dominoes. Continue, my friend.
And so one of the dominoes that falls is in 2012, they pick Kirk Cousins, someone that we know the Shanahans were very fond of. And so how do things work out for Kirk Cousins if he's here with the Broncos, with the Shanahans?
Yep.
Does he gain that reputation of being a guy who falls apart in the playoffs, or does he have more success and you end up talking about his entire career taking on a different arc? Our conclusion was that Mike would have eventually handed the reins to Kyle as head coach.
Okay.
And that Kirk Cousins would be heading into his 12th Broncos season and his 11th as their starting quarterback. And because he would have had some more early success and maybe a playoff win at some point early, the Broncos would have won a Super Bowl at some point in the 2010s with Kirk Cousins as quarterback. Right now, though, they'd still be they'd be in a little bit of a mess and a little bit of a pickle because they would be clearly fighting for second place behind Kansas City. KC still gets Patrick Mahomes, and that doesn't change in our timeline.
All right.
But
yeah.
You've got but the thing is, you're operating from a more stable spot, right? And
for sure.
If we go deeper, everything you would know about the Broncos roster, all the players that you would like, and that's part of the fun of this exercise is like thinking about like everything draft picks, all that are different. Like another big thing out of this is if they win that 2005 AFC Championship game, John Elway never comes back to the Broncos as an executive. Eventually, Mike kicks himself upstairs as Kyle becomes the head coach.
Josh McDaniels is never the head coach.
John Fox is never.
Peyton
Manning's never here either.
Yeah, Gary Kubiak's never the head coach. We have no idea who Nathaniel Hackett is in Broncos country. It's a fascinating exercise for sure. People can go watch those on demand. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Check them out. They're fun. While I got you, I do want to stay on the Broncos quickly, Mace. You wrote a really interesting piece this morning at denversports.com. Al Wilson, not in the Ring of Fame. Why is Al Wilson not in the Ring of Fame? I saw the social caption. He's got, 5 Pro Bowls? And he's the only one with that many not in the Ring of Fame? What is going on here, and when can the Broncos correct that wrong?
They could have corrected it this year if they wanted to. They chose not to by not inducting anybody. As I'm going to get into over the next few weeks, kind of going through some Ring of Fame cases, the Broncos could do one a year probably for the next decade, and I don't think they would be reaching in terms of players already eligible and then players who will become eligible, because you're going to be talking about Chris Harris Jr. being a Ring of Famer, Von Miller being a Ring of Famer. I think Aqib Talib, once you got John Lynch 4 years, 4 Pro Bowls in the Ring of Fame, I think you have to take Aqib Talib, right?
Yep.
So you have those 3, and then you have others that I'm going to get into, like Gary Kubiak. I'd argue for Trevor Price, for example. Riley Odoms, Steve Foley, who has a couple of All-Pros back in the 70s, first team. Steve Foley is your all-time Bronco leader in interceptions. He's still not in the Ring of Fame. That it's kind of, there are some misses here over the years where when you look at the standards that have been set, there are people who should be in that aren't in. But I think the thing with Al is he, not long after his career ended, he sued the Broncos, sued the neurosurgeon that worked on him, who worked with the Broncos, claiming negligence. Al Wilson suffered a neck injury late in the 2006 season against Seattle. He went back out and actually played later that year, but you could tell that he was affected and struggling. The Broncos trade him to the New York Giants that offseason, but the trade gets nullified because he fails the physical. Al Wilson's claim was that he failed the physical because the surgery was not recommended by the neurosurgeon. That led to the lawsuit. And again, a lot of hard feelings coming in. Al Wilson ends up losing that lawsuit. It was adjudicated in 2011. And basically, like, as I've gathered, look, when you're suing the team, you sued the team.
Yeah.
He was kind of persona non grata for a while, and he didn't want anything to do with the Broncos. He actually did an AMA on Reddit 7 years ago and expressed those sentiments. But then about 2.5 years after that, an olive branch came. Patrick Smythe inviting Al Wilson to the Broncos to watch practice and kind of get things reconnected. And you could and they honored him they watched practice. They saluted him at a game. And I feel like that was the moment where you should start to let bygones be bygones. Now, the years after that, you had Champ Bailey and you had Mike Shanahan and you had Peyton Manning, and those guys had to go in, and you wanted to kind of give them their own here. But now you're past that. I don't see a good reason why Al Wilson isn't in the Ring of Fame at this point. Not only because you can say everyone else who's eligible at 5 Pro Bowls is in and he's not. So what's going on here? But also you remember watching those teams. I remember watching those teams. I mean, he was a core player. He was a dominant player.
He was.
I'd say, you could argue the best middle/inside linebacker this team has had probably since the Orange Crush days. I think you probably go back to Randy Gradishar. And Carl Mecklenburg kind of lined up all over the place. But I'd say probably the best middle/inside linebacker this team has had since Randy Gradishar.
Wow, high praise.
Yeah, it is, and I think he deserved it. I mean, and then on top of that, he was one of those heart and soul guys on the team as well. So I was on with Stink with Stinking Chad Andrews this morning, and I do think that you have Al Wilson and another player who isn't as high profile in terms of being a leader, but is incredibly accomplished, Trevor Pryce. Those two players, now Trevor was around on the teams that won Super Bowls, although they didn't play much in 97 and then got on the field in 98. But you look at Trevor Pryce and Al Wilson, and they're kind of associated with those years after the Super Bowl wins that were still pretty good. Broncos go to the playoffs a few times. We mentioned 05, kind of the capstone to that era, getting to the AFC Championship game. But they're kind of forgotten because they exist in the shadow of those championship years. But it doesn't mean there weren't great players doing great things on those teams.
Their profiles would have been elevated. We spent 10 minutes on the what if. What if? Well, Al Wilson's profile is a lot higher if they win the 05 Super Bowl.
For individual honors, if they beat the Steelers and then win the Super Bowl that year, Al Wilson's in the Ring of Fame. Trevor Pryce is in the Ring of Fame.
Jake Plummer?
Jake Plummer maybe gets to the Ring of Fame too.
Yeah.
John Lynch doesn't wait to go in the Hall of Fame. He might well have been a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Right.
Like that. Even somebody like Rod Smith, who's gotten really no traction for the Hall of Fame, he's a huge player on a third Super Bowl team. And now you're saying, okay, there was no John Elway throwing you the ball. It's Jake Plummer. I think we're talking about Rod being a guy who at least is in that room as a finalist for the Hall of Fame. if the Broncos win that game.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Mike Shanahan he's still waiting for the Hall of Fame. His call would have come at the most immediate opportunity after he stopped coaching.
Yeah.
So that's part of the things that changed there. Because of that is how these players are remembered. And it's all about winning the big one. I mean, they don't, they don't put up division title banners or anything to commemorate those in Power Field at Mile High. This is in Indianapolis.
Right.
Denver doesn't hang finalist banners.
No.
Okay.
We hang Super Bowl banners. We display Lombardi trophies. All right. We are sort of starting to run short on time, so we're going to keep this thing moving and get to the Colorado Rockies, because more bad news. Jake and I yesterday talked about how they're on pace now to lose over 100 games. Spent some time on if Dick Monfort might actually sell the team.
I love Jake's answer.
Yeah,
1%.
The answer went from 0% to 1%. But fill us in on what you wrote about last night at denversports.com. Zach Veen, supposed to be the next big thing. Well, we're not going to get to see the next big thing at all this year, it sounds like.
Yeah, he'd been struggling in Hartford and Double-A in the Eastern League. He was terrific last year in the Arizona Fall League, but he kind of Double-A kicked him in the butt a little bit when he got called up in the back half of last year. But then he goes down to Arizona, has a terrific season, 889 OPS in the Arizona Fall League, and you think, okay, everything's on track for him. Well, he's been dealing with issues with his left hand and wrist. He actually spent a little bit of time this year on the IL for left wrist inflammation, and now he's actually had surgery in his left hand on a ligament that's going to end his season. Of course, just first of all, on the positive side, now you know why this year his power numbers, his numbers for average, everything was down unexpectedly bad. It's been a disappointing season, but he's been playing through this for a while. So the surgery was necessary, but now at the same time, you're kind of saying, okay, you're going to kind of have to hit the reset button on Zach Veen a little bit. I think being in Double-A this year, I think the Rockies had a pretty firm expectation that at some point in 23, he is stepping into the lineup on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the outfield. The initial projection is center field, but that he's becoming an everyday player out there. Now I think you have to put that on hold a bit, because you got to see how he recovers and then just see how long it takes for him to get his stroke back here. And the reason why this comes into play, if we're reading tea leaves on what Bill Schmidt said when he popped on the broadcast last Saturday down in Atlanta when the Rockies were in the process of getting swept.
Badly, by the way.
Badly.
That not was competitive in any of the.
That was ugly.
Games. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Rockies have had some scheduling misfortune here of playing the two hottest teams in baseball at this moment on this road trip, playing the Braves and the Reds. Interesting thing, the Braves and Reds play tonight. It's only the seventh time that you've had two teams coming into a series with win streaks of at least 8 games.
Wow. Yeah, someone's got to lose. Someone's streak will get snapped tonight. There's no ties in baseball.
Right.
And real quick, the Rockies' prize is Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout tonight at Coors Field. So
at least they don't have Shohei pitching in this series. They got a break there. They only have to deal with him at the plate. They don't have to deal with him on the mound because he just had double-digit strikeouts in his last start. So it's not as bad as it could be. But yeah, the Rockies got a bad break on this series. But at the same time, you look around. A lot of guys are hurt. CJ Cron's still out. Chris Bryant is still out. Brendan Rodgers. They're actually hoping that Brendan Rodgers might be able to play at some point in the back half of the season. So it'd be nice to get. It won't help, the outcome of this year, but you just want to kind of get past that hurdle as you're starting to look ahead to next year. But Bill Schmidt talked about how trade decisions are going to be impacted by where the players fit long term, and then also the players they've got coming up. So you look at somebody like Zach Veen, and okay, if you'd planned on plugging him in to your outfield for next season, then that's another move that you can. That's another player that you can move on from potentially. Well, if you don't have him in, how does that kind of that change your roster playing a little bit? The other thing also in play with Zach Veen is Nolan Jones, who was called up several weeks ago. For all that's gone wrong with the Rockies, Nolan Jones has been something right, because
he's hitting the ball over the fence. I can tell you that.
He's hitting it a ton. He's hitting for power and average. He's got the walk off that he had at the end of the series against the Padres that salvaged one win from a 6-game homestand and prevented their worst homestand in over a decade. That was the longest walk-off homer of the StatCast era. So you start thinking, okay, can he sustain it? Can he be part of the plan? But Zach, when you see an injury like Zach Veen, okay, does that change something? Because we know the Rockies tend to be reluctant to make trades. So they need as many young guys coming up that they can count on plugging into their lineup as possible, to where they're willing to make those decisions and say, okay, yeah, we're going to trade CJ Cron once he gets healthy and back from the IL. Maybe you think about trading Charlie Blackmon here. Yep. I mean, I know that's going to hurt emotionally to not see Charlie out there. He's currently on the IL, but he's expected back in a few weeks here. And he should probably have about a 3-week run up to the deadline to be healthy.
Give Charlie a chance to go chase a ring, Mace.
Yes,
he doesn't have a lot left in the tank. Trade him to a team that could go win it all. I think that's the right thing to do by the player. I do.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll see. Like the landscape will kind of shift as you have injuries on other teams. But I mean, if Atlanta has an injury or two in their lineup, send Charlie home. I mean, he went to Georgia Tech. Send him back there and let him go for it. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm biased. I'm a Braves fan. I'd love to see Charlie Black. I'd love to see, because I've always liked Charlie. I'd love to see him. If he's not going to be in Colorado, I want to see him in Atlanta. But just get him somewhere where he's got a shot. You look around. You look around the lineup. I mean, Jerks and Profar's had some moments. Does he have some value? A guy to watch here in terms of potential trade value. Chase Anderson. They had claimed him from the Rays. The Rays designated him for assignment early last month. They claimed and brought him in. He'd strung together some good starts, was probably the most reliable pitcher on the rotation for the Rockies until, I got you back.
Oh, sorry. Did I hop out there?
You froze a little bit. I'm like, so Chase Anderson's the most reliable was until he got shelled by Atlanta, but everyone got shelled by Atlanta last weekend for the Rockies. Yeah. He was the most consistent starter that they had. So if you get him back on track in the next couple of turns through the rotation, every contender's looking for pitching. I mean, you look around, even the Dodgers are struggling with pitching. The Braves are stringing together a rotation with duct tape and baling wire right now. Everybody is looking for a pitcher, and if Chase Anderson has another couple of good starts, he has value. If Daniel Bard unfortunately gave up the home run there against Cincinnati on Wednesday, but he's done well since coming back and struggling back in March, and then taking some time to work on his mental health. If Bard continues to put it together, he has value. They should have traded Daniel Bard last year. Yeah, but I digress. The thing is, the Rockies have to go into this and not overvalue their players and not place a premium on the value of avoiding 100 losses. I mean, they have got to let go of that. And we're going to find out. I mean, I'll say this. The fact that Schmidt last Saturday was talking about the players coming up and how they fit and wanting to get them out there, if you're looking for a sign that maybe the Rockies are actually going to sell players at the deadline, I think it exists in that comment from Bill Schmidt. So we'll see.
All right, cool. Good stuff from Mace on the Rockies. He is our senior Broncos writer, but a passionate Rockies guy, and I always appreciate his insight. We'll close the show briefly. Just want to say we're thinking of Coach Prime as he undergoes surgery today for a blood clot. He actually released a video that said he has blood clots in both legs. That is affecting the circulation. We don't know the timeline, haven't seen an update, but Prime is in a procedure either right now, just got finished up, just getting prepped. We're thinking of Prime, and he said it best himself. He's getting this all handled now so he can go walk the sideline for the Buffs this year.
Yeah, I mean, you think about how much of a whirling dervish he's been as a coach, how he seems to be everywhere and involved, and he's doing this while he's having some significant health struggles. Yeah. I mean, it tells you a lot about Deion's fortitude, I think. I mean, there's a lot we can debate on the Deion Sanders methodology, but you can't debate his courage with us, and you can't debate his intensity and his willingness to kind of plow through as he's dealing with this. So really hope he gets better. The life he has brought to that program and really the university as a whole has just been pretty extraordinary to see here. And it was something, it was a jolt that CU needed. And I would argue it was a jolt that even all of Colorado sports needed at this point. So hope he gets better. Hope everything is okay. Want to see him stalking the sidelines there against TCU and gosh, that's only like 8-9 weeks away, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
So. I do too. Well said, my friend. Well, we appreciate everyone tuning into Coffee Break. We will be back on Monday. For Mace, for Matt behind the scenes, Will. This is Coffee Break presented by Superbook Sports.